Hey, well, thank you everyone for joining us today. I am Pam Hurd, and on behalf of myself and Katrina Walsman, we want to welcome you guys to our webinar today, which we're excited about. This is also actually our program officer, Dr. Amelia Karraker, is a health scientist administrator in the Population and Social Processes branch at the NIA in the Division of Behavioral and Social Research. Amelia has a broad portfolio in addition to our network. She oversees a bunch of very big data collection efforts focused on education and health and cognitive education and health disparities in later life, including disparities in dementia and cognitive decline. So what we're going to do today is Amelia is going to provide us kind of an overview, or provide everyone an overview of what of some key parts of her job and research funding at NIH and within NIA. And what I want to encourage people to do, Amelia was very clear ahead of time, please feel free to interject with questions as she goes. So she'll take questions as she goes. The way to do this is just to put them in the Q&A. I'm going to monitor the Q&A, and I will basically periodically interject to ask your questions to Amelia. So without any further ado, thank you, Amelia, for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Pam. Do my slides look okay, and can you hear me okay?
Slides look great, and we can hear you.
Okay, great. So forgive a little bit of a playful title, but I want to talk today about diving into aging research, and the underlining the ing in aging is intentional because one of the really exciting and special things about the National Institute on Aging is that we're really focused on processes that unfold across the life course. It's not like we love people of all ages, and especially love older folks. But you don't have to be studying a population, you don't have to be this old to ride the NIA train necessarily. So and that's, I think, intellectually very stimulating and satisfying, and also makes for really good science. So for today's talk, as Pam said, please interject. I'll talk a little bit about NIH, NIA, and DBSR, some NIA training and career opportunities, some general application tips. We're also lucky in that Katrina regular reviewers for NIH and have valuable insights, and try to answer Q&A throughout, both that you sent in advance. Thanks so much, as well as anything that pops up. So first I want to start with some NIH terminology. NIH, the National Institutes of Health, is a kind of alphabet soup kind of place. And one of the acronyms I use, and I'll try not to, I'll just run through these. First is an IC. So that's an NIH institute or center. So this could be NIA, but we also have centers like the Fogarty International Center. It's important to differentiate between them because different ICs may have different policies and procedures. For example, at NIA, K awards are reviewed by peer review panels that are chartered by NIA. So only NIA KO1s are reviewed at NIA. At other institutes, some of those might be reviewed in standing study sections. And that's information that can be useful for you as you tailor your application. We also may have differences in terms of specific due dates for internal policies and things like that. So just because maybe you know NICHD, even though we're all playing for the same team, there may be some nuances that are used to know. Next is this term mechanism. There are three types of mechanisms that we use to support external research and related activities. First is a grant, which is the most common. Second, a cooperative agreement, and third, a contract. People use the word mechanism a lot, but really what I think they mean is an activity code. And this is this one letter followed by two number sort of shorthand for some of the specific types of grants, typically grants that we are funding. So, they could be F31 or F32. The F tells you it's a fellowship application. The T32, T is for training. K01 or a kangaroo. K you can think of as career in some, Homer Simpson kind of land. And then the bread and butter things like R01s and R21s. And it's also important to differentiate those because different activity codes pertain to different notices of funding opportunity announcement. NOFOs is what they're called now. And again, sort of there's differences in terms of the specific guidelines that govern those. And there are a bunch of different NOFOs, which I'll talk about in a moment. So anytime you're submitting to NIH, you're submitting to a notice of funding opportunity. Notices of funding opportunity, and specifically one type of them, notices of special interest, are the primary ways that we solicit new research. These provide the research, explain the research priority areas that we may be interested in, and provide guidance on application requirements. So reading the NOFOs is really important in terms of making sure that it's really important to follow those directions. And one of my roles as a program official or health scientist administrator, they're kind of synonymous, is to help navigate that process. The devil is in the details. The NOFO includes what you can ask for in terms of budget, amount of money, what kinds of things that the NOFO will pay for, how long the grant is, what is it you're doing? Are you getting training for yourself? Are you developing a course? Are you supporting a network like this one? Are you collecting primary data collection? And also includes information on things like what the reviewers are going to review you on, as well as how NIH may make the awards. I want to note too that most science is funded out of what we call parent announcements on investigator identified topics. So I included here the link, and I'll share these with Jennifer, who so graciously set all of this up. Thank you so much. After this presentation. But most of the science that we fund is not specific ideas that NIH is generating. The ideas come from the research community. So, well, it's good to know about some of the nuanced details of the kinds of things that we support. Most of the science is coming from you, the community. Somebody asked this really great question: when to submit a proposal via a regular R01 PAR versus a NOCI, pros and cons and strategic considerations. And I'll just say, like, even asking this question, I think reveals some really important sophistication that I wish everybody had, and it's my job to try to elucidate this. So there are actually a bunch of different kinds of NOFOs. And as I said, they have a lot of valuable information. So for example, the NOFO will tell you which ICs are participating. Not every IC joins every NOFO. So if you're doing a topic, say you're doing something on, say, chronic kidney disease, and NIDDK isn't joining that might be a problem, something you'd want to know. Eligibility, what kinds of PIs and institutions can submit? When is it due? What is the budget? How long can it be? That's what we call the project period. How are reviewers going to evaluate you? There's some standard review criteria, which are actually in the process of being updated. That's sort of like, how are you going to be graded? Here's some more alphabet soup. First is, as I mentioned before, it's called a PA. This is used for what we call parent announcements. For example, R01 on investigator initiated topic. You also have a PAR. R is for review. You can think of this as like Sesame Street for NIH applicants, if you will. PARs typically, but not always, have a special review panel. That means that we have standing study sections that are always meeting and review things like these parent announcements. PARs may have special review groups that are put together just for that topic. And that's important to know. It's also important to know whether that PAR is using a special review panel, because this could be to your advantage. So for example, if you are doing work, for example, on methodological development, having a specialized methodological expertise and a PAR may be really useful. We also have something called a PAS, which is less used. But the S is for, I think of S is for, a dollar sign, PAS, set aside funds, meaning there's money that's been set aside to pay applications to that NOFO. And that's really important because you think about this in a world of competitive funding. It means that if there's good science that comes into that NOFO, it's going to be paid. So I think anytime there's special review or set aside funds or both, in the case of an RFA, you really want to pay attention to that and think about whether it's a good fit for the science that you're doing. So an RFA is sort of like a combination of a PAR and PAS, where typically there are both set aside funds as well as special review responsiveness criteria. One thing to keep in mind with RFAs is there's also typically only one receipt date, which means that it's important to sort of stay on top of when those come out. How do you stay on top of them? One way is to subscribe to the NIH guide as well as NIA newsletters. But it's also important, again, with all of these to note what's actually in the NOFO. So some of these have special review criteria. It could be something about say you have a project that's developing new methods and their particular review criteria focused on innovation in those methods beyond what would typically appear in, say, like a parent announcement. There also may be responsiveness things, and these are really no-go criteria. They're super important to pay attention to. So for example, if an application, if an RFA states that applications that only describe health inequities but don't seek to explain them are not responsive, you can't just do a descriptive application. Responsiveness means if you're not responsive to the call, you won't be reviewed. So that's really important. And then the last is what we call a NOSI, a Notice of Special Interest. This is in many cases replacing the PA. But in many cases is really like a heads up to the research community that we're interested in a topic. I think the one that I've dropped in here is one that I was involved in, which is focused on sex and gender differences in ADRD disease processes and outcomes. So getting back to sort of the top question, the regular R01, PAR, and NOSI, with the NOSI, there's sort of like no pros or cons. It's just sort of like a heads up, we'd like things on this topic, but it doesn't mean there's special review or special set aside. Regarding like a PAR versus a parent, I mean, it's useful oftentimes to, again, talk with your friendly neighborhood program official about the pros and cons. A special review panel may work to your advantage. However, in the cases where there are special review panels, sometimes they don't review as frequently. So for example, NIH has 3 standard receipt dates a year. Some PARs, when they have these special review panels, they may only have a review once a year, which means if you need to resubmit, you might have to wait a lot longer to do that resubmission, to wait again for the renewal, the review.
Amelia, can you
Yeah.
clarify on the NOSI in particular? So what is from an applicant perspective, like what should they take from a notice of special interest? Does it mean sort of there might be more things coming down the line that are more especially targeted, or do you know what I mean? Like how should an applicant think about that?
That's a great question. I think that may be a fair interpretation, but it's not a promise that there may be something else coming along the way. Administratively, NOCs are advantageous for us because it helps us to keep track of science that's coming into a certain area, but really it is telling the community, we'd like more on this particular topic. Or, for example, in the case of the sex and gender ADRD NOC, one of the things we really wanted people to pay attention to was that sex and gender aren't the same thing, and having applications that would think about that carefully. So it's kind of like a formal communication between the NIH and the community in terms of a topic. But I guess what I would say is, because there's no set aside or special review, don't, you should always submit, I think, the best science that you can. I mean, like, you want to be strategic in terms of thinking about where the opportunities are in terms of set asides or special review, but it's not, you shouldn't bend over backwards to respond to that NOC, because you can always submit to the parent and there's no sort of special interest. But on the other hand, if it's a priority area for the institute that may be advantageous to you in terms of potentially in terms of funding, but I wouldn't make too big of a deal out of it.
Thank you.
That's a pretty hedgy answer. So to take a step back a little about NIH and NIA, the National Institutes of Health is the largest public biomedical funder in the world. For this fiscal year, total budget was about $47 billion. The National Institute on Aging is one of the 27 ICs, Institutes and Centers of the NIH. We are focused on understanding the nature of aging and extending the healthy, active years of life for all people. I am a sociologist and demographer by training, and I sit within the Division of Behavioral and Social Research within NIA. Our focus is on funding extramural research in areas of social, behavioral, and economic domains, including research infrastructure and training. We emphasize cross-disciplinary research at multiple levels, from cells to society, and at stages from basic through translational. Alzheimer's disease, which I'll return to, is a really important scientific emphasis throughout NIA. And our science is managed across 2 research branches. As Pam said, I sit in the population and social processes branch. This is focused on demographic, social, economic, institutional, geographic, and other factors at the population level, including nationally and other population represented studies. We also have our sister branch, individual and behavioral processes, which is focused on psychological, behavioral, and interpersonal processes. So as I noted, Alzheimer's disease and Alzheimer's disease related dementias, that's the term that we use here based on some guidance from Congress, is a major emphasis area. NIA is in fact the lead federal agency for Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. This includes everything from dementia care in the formal caregiving, informal caregiving, efforts focused on prevention across the life course, epidemiology and equities and resources to support them. Again, to reinforce this point I made about the National Institute on Aging, there's really a growing body of research, including supported by folks affiliated with this network, indicating that Alzheimer's disease and those dementias are unfolding across the entire life course. And this is really important in terms of addressing brain health equity and potentially understanding modifiable factors for risk and resilience.
I'm going to interrupt you, Amelia.
Mhm.
And we have a question from the audience. On one of your slides, you indicate funding economic research, but NIH has not always been interested in focusing on studies that examine costs as the primary outcomes. Could you
Yes.
please, could you please clarify NIH's position?
Yes, so I think that's an excellent question. I think the individual is referring to, I think it's a 2016 NIH policy statement on behavioral economics. You're correct that we don't, we really don't think about cost as left-hand side variables. However, there are a lot of topics within economics, behavioral economics, the role of the way that healthcare is financed, the way that economic resources shape health across the life course, that are all appropriate topics. I really encourage the individual and anyone else who's interested, identifies as an economist or not, interested in these types of topics, to really talk with a program official about this, because there's really exciting amount of research that we're doing. So for example, is one of our demography and economics of aging centers is at the National Bureau of Economic Research, and they're engaging in a really exciting suite of activities across the field of economics. So I hope that's like a starting point to that question. Someone also asked this excellent question, which is really a question I think it's important to ask of any funder, is what are NIA's priorities? What do we see as the future of aging research funding? There are a lot of hyperlinks in this presentation, which you can click through at your leisure. A first place to look, there are these three major resources. One is the NIA Strategic Directions. A couple of selected ones are included here. These are typically very broad, and I hope everyone in the audience can see themselves here. For example, goal B is to better understand the effects of a variety of factors on aging, including personal, interpersonal, and societal, as well as, again, a commitment to understanding health disparities. We also have a set of ADRD milestones with success criteria that you can look at. I'll share a few examples in a moment, as well as for our division, a 2019 NACA review. What is NACA? That's the National Advisory Council on Aging. When you get your summary statement and there's a council date, that council is, if it's for NIA, is for NACA. And this is really sort of an advisory group to the Institute on major activities.
So there is a question here about if you could talk about where priorities come from and the degree to which they're determined sort of top down versus bottom up.
Oh, this is such a great question, especially because I glossed over the last point, which is NIA's strategic directions for 2026 through 2030 are currently being developed, and we are asking for feedback from the research community and other stakeholders regarding that. So I think it's really an iterative process. We want to see everyone making sure that we're representing the pressing scientific questions that we should be addressing. It's kind of an answer. So a few of the ADRD milestones tied to our priorities, and just listing a few here, focused on population research. One of the sort of hot topics at NIA, based on some congressional report language from a couple of years ago, is working on the exposome. What is the exposome? It's my answer to that question, as I think about it, is it's sort of like the summation of exposures that individuals experience at a individual level, as well as contextually across multiple levels. I also wanted to note here, we have a real emphasis on health equity in terms of understanding diverse risk factors and resilience factors across diverse populations. So there are, I think, several dozen of these that you can click through, but these are some of the most relevant. As I said, we also, as a division, all the divisions are periodically reviewed, and our last review was in 2019 for the Division of Behavioral and Social Research. It's really a review of our activities for the past 5 years and the roadmap of where we're going. A variety of different research priorities were identified. A couple that I'll note for this group: improving understanding of health disparities in aging, and particularly moving beyond describing inequities to understanding modifiable levers. Studying the influences of macro social trends on aging. This is everything from cohort changes in levels of education and the content of education, to the changing nature of work, to climate change, to changes in living arrangements as more adults are living alone. And as also noted here, enhanced research on cognitive aging. So I also want to talk a little bit about NIA training and career development. This is a slide that our awesome NIA training office put together, showing all of the opportunities for gaining training and experiences from before college all the way through being a senior investigator. Really, the point take home here is just to show you the wide variety of activity codes that are available. Someone asked a nice specific question about the R25 KO1 Ready program. And this is a relatively new program, I think, that is focused on providing training to individuals in academia who are interested in more diverse career opportunities. So including things related to business and entrepreneurship. Through this program, there's both a KO1 career award as well as an R21, an R25 training program. I have to confess I'm not an expert on this, but the truly fantastic people in our training office are, and I've dropped their info here. Somebody asked this other great question: is there a particular sequence one needs to consider for the following grant mechanisms or activity codes, an NIA KO1 and R03, why or why not? They said that they were assuming you cannot have a KO1 and R03 under review at the same time. So this is my opportunity to wear a beret and I guess serve as a myth buster. And I'd say that that's not necessarily true. You can have a KO1 and an R03 at the same time. Again, this is why it's important to look at the NOFO. One of the things you do need to note for a KO1 is that you can't have previously held an R01. The whole point of a KO1 is to get training training and research experience so that you can write that first R01. If you're already ready to write the R01, go ahead, go for it. You may not need to do a KO1. I will note, though, for a KO1, you can have smaller research funding, so things like an R03 or R25, so that doesn't automatically preclude KO1. I would note, though, that you can't have the same science under review in multiple places at the same time. So, for example, if one of your KO1 aims is to use the HRS to look at the relationship between fruit and vegetable consumption and cognitive aging, just looking at what's sitting right next to me. And that's the focus of your R03 and you're submitting them in the same round. That doesn't fly. The substantive science can only be reviewed in one place at one time.
Amelia?
Yep.
Can I just interject? If you were just awarded an R01 and that's your first R01, there is a K mechanism that you can apply to. I have one of them. They're the KO2s. They're for more mid-career, senior career folks. They're not mentored, but what you have to do is you have to propose an extension of your R01 that you need additional training in to do. So it's related to your R01, it builds on it, but it gets you additional training. And a lot of people don't know about the KO2, and NIA is one of only a few institutes that actually fund that mechanism. So I just wanted to put a plug in there for that.
Oh, thank you so much, Katrina. I'm so glad you did. And that brings me to like a bigger point, which is, you know, there are so many different activity codes, so many different types of opportunities. It may seem kind of overwhelming. You know, I showed you that chart. Part of my job as a PO is to help you, you know what you want to do scientifically. Part of my job is to help you navigate the NIH process so that you know how to do that within our system. Just the takeaway on this slide is there are lots of resources on training and career opportunities on the web, including this really stellar NIA training team. They're just really great people. I'll note that they actually go through for a bunch of these activity codes in terms of what's the point of them, who's eligible, what's the budget. There's also a lot of info here on training, events, the NIH loan repayment program. Also really valuable, there are some sample applications available in their entirety. So they are redacted with personal information removed. But I think one of the best things for writing an application is to see one that's been successful. I also want to switch gears and sort of talking more generally. I want to emphasize that NIH and NIA fund secondary data analyses projects, including for R01s. And we also support data sources for this purpose. So here are a few of the many population research studies that we support. You can probably find one of your favorites on here. I won't spend too much time on this, but again, R21s, R03s, R01s for secondary data analysis. Those are all things that we see all the time. So when should you talk to a program official or project officer, a PO? Those are the same thing. I don't know why they're two different names. There are a few different points. One is first, when you're preparing to submit, you have a great idea and you want broad feedback. Maybe you want advice on the no for the activity code. Actually, fairly frequently I have discussions with people about, should they just submit the R01 or do they need to do the K01 first? And that's part of my job, is to help people think through that decision. Thinking about study section options. In some cases, you also will need advance permission. So if you're submitting a large application. Another time that I often talk with folks is after their summary statement is issued, to discuss the reviews, potential next steps, and then post-award for updates and discussion about supplements and renewals. I'll just say that talking with applicants is one of my favorite parts of my job. Really it's our job to help you navigate the system, to help you, be aware of the policies and procedures that are in place so that really your science can shine.
We have a couple of questions here, Amelia. For secondary data projects and data sets that are non-NIA funded, can those be used for an NIA grant?
Oh yes, absolutely. I just have to sell our product, but I really, it's always about, like with any project, I mean, it's like playing to the strengths of the data you have. Educating the reviewer, actually, especially if it's a data set that people may not be as familiar with, educating the reviewer on what the strengths of that data set are. Yeah, that's a great question.
And then there's sort of another question here about generically, I think, navigating NIA, NIH, and how, some institutions are kind of better resourced to help people as compared to others, and what kinds of things maybe NIH, NIA does to address that.
That's a really important question. And as a sociologist, I think a structural question as well. There are a few sort of different options. I mean, we are sort of working in terms of, there's some particular activity codes that are only eligible for certain kinds of institutions are eligible for them. For example, an R15, which is for institutions. It's sort of like a combination of research and training award for institutions with low levels of NIH funding. Options like modular budgets, which may be easier for smaller institutions to put together. But I'll just acknowledge, like, this is something that we've got our eye on. Thank you.
Amelia, one thing I did want to kind of plug here is that the NIA does fund things like networks like this, where we're trying to democratize kind of access to some of this information and resource, this webinar being like one kind of example of where that's happening. I think we can do more, but I think that's one area, get people on these webinars who might be at some of these more, these institutions that have less resources, as even staff members attending could be useful, like grant staff for learning about the NIH as well. So just wanted to kind of plug that. So
that's a really excellent point. Thanks, Katrina. So now I want to dig a little bit more into some of the specific, when you're preparing an application, things to be thinking about. and kind of like the bread and butter of an NIH application. And Katrina and Pam have both been our experienced reviewers, so would love to have them chime in throughout. But the specific aims page is really the basis for our conversations with applicants for me as a PO. The specific aims page outlines the application significance, hypotheses, data, methods at a high level. I really think of this as like the gestalt of what you propose to do. I would say that in NIH applications, it's important not to bury the lead and not to be subtle. So people will do all kinds of tricks, and you can see this. They're not tricks. I think it's just like smart word processing in their applications. Well, where they will, bold things that they really want reviewers to pay attention to, or have a box that shows sort of like their key variables and what the distribution of those variables look like. For many of the reviewers who score your application, this may be the only part of their application that they look at. There's no magic number of aims, but it should be appropriate for the activity code, the budget, and the project period. And then this is a piece of advice I first heard when I was teaching, which is to do less better. One of the tricks sometimes with an application is figuring out, like, where does this application end and the next one begin? But I will say that, think about what you can actually adequately motivate and describe in the page limits that you have. And I think that it's typically far preferable to have 2 good aims than to have 3 so-so aims. I would even say it's better to have 2 good aims than to have 2 good aims and a 3rd so-so aim. If there is a weakness in your application, the reviewers will find it. And as I said, there are a bunch of applications online. Pam?
Yeah, just to chime in, and just as a reminder, hopefully the folks who are registered for this webinar know this, but one of the things our network does is actually we will review specific aims pages for you. We kind of host which I think we just sent out the announcement, right, Katrina? Yeah, so we just sent out an announcement for this. If for some reason you're actually not registered with us on email, please do that because you will get these announcements. But this is one of the things that we do for folks is we annually will we'll do a kind of mock reviews for people's aims pages. And I think Amelia is just 100% right, which is that if you don't have a strong aims page, if you don't have a clear, robust, strong aims page, the grant is probably not going to fly for reviewers. They closely read the aims page, and then they're going to read the rest of it. But if the aims page isn't clear, you're kind of in trouble, basically. So I think just want to emphasize what Amelia was already saying.
Yeah, and just as a follow-up, the workshop, the webinar, the grant mentoring happens in December, but we request that you let us know if you want to participate by the end of September, and give us your aims page sometime in November. So, and then we will use that information to try and identify at least one other person beyond Pam, myself, or one of our co-investigators on the network to come and review. So it won't just be us, it'll be other people who might be more, have more expertise in the area in which you're trying to get, secure money in, to provide feedback on it. And so just keep that in mind and look out for it. You can sign up for our network if you haven't already on our webpage, and you can always email either one of us for all of that information if you need that. So
there is another question here asking about the reviewers not reading the application. So just to be clear about this, reviewers do read your applications. We were just talking earlier about actually hosting a webinar just on panel for people, because I think there are a lot of myths and confusion about what actually happens in panel. And so I think we probably, some of the questions I'm seeing, I think we should do that actually. But reviewers definitely read your application. I'm sure, we've all had this experience that someone misses something or didn't see something that you stated somewhere in the application, but reviewers definitely read your applications, just to be clear about that. Okay, sorry, we have a few more questions here, so I'm just going to get through them. For EdDem specific aims review workshop, should you only submit aims? Oh, well, sorry. If your grant is focusing on education and aging ADRD, it is the case that for our network in particular, we are broadly kind of focused on educational disparities intermingled with kind of race and ethnicity disparities and cognitive, but we think about it somewhat broadly, right? So if you're thinking about cognitive health, or it doesn't have to be rigidly dementia, for example, but broadly it does sort of have to fit within our the scope of our network. And if you look on our website, we lay that out pretty clearly, like what's within the scope of the network, basically. Okay, I am past the eligibility time frame for a K-99 and nervous to apply for grant funding at an R level, mainly because I've been informed it's difficult to apply for an R without a track record of funding, which K provides, lack of sufficient training in general. Is there any information or insights that you might have that could address this concern or bridge this gap? Especially if I'm a non-US citizen resident applicant and an ESI. Open to any ideas or creative strategies. Thank you.
Oh, that is like a very dense, rich question. I guess like I would want to talk with the applicant, and I hope they, or the individual, and I hope that they email me about sort of like specifically where they're at. So there's a lot to unpack there, but one of the things I would note is the applicant said that they're, I think, not a US citizen. For almost every application to NIH in the R series, the award is typically to the institution, not to the applicant. That's not the case with Ks or with FCERTs, I believe, but for our series awards, the award is to the institution. Jennifer nodding her head yes. So your citizen status is orthogonal. There are a lot of different ways to get training, if training is what you need, or small pots of money. So another plug for this network are the pilot projects that it supports. That can be a stepping stone. Actually, I just heard today the good news that someone who'd received a pilot award from this network just had their R01 funded.
Well, it wasn't, let me clarify, it wasn't a pilot award, but they participated in our grant review workshop, and they've also participated in a lot of our trainings. So
sorry about that.
Even better, right?
But I will actually across, I'll say like across the NIH, we have a series of networks just like this one that fund pilot projects, and those are often the preliminary data that people use. If what you need is a little bit of time to get preliminary data together, those pilots can be really valuable in terms of jumpstarting a bigger project. So I hope this person, be happy to chat with them more about what they said. Just my own friendly amendment to my comment here about reviewers not looking at their applications. Of course, the reviewers look at your application. And I think I'll go into this more in what sounds like a webinar to be. What I would say is that typically for a review, there are three reviewers who are assigned your application specifically. They will read your application in depth. However, everyone in the panel who is not in conflict will score your application. For those individuals, it's probably not the case that they're going to have time to read your application in addition to the 10 other applications that they were individually assigned to review on. So, I do think that as a non-reviewer here, so I'm on a little bit of thin ice. I do think it's important to think about, the specific aims as sort of like a guide for what the reviewers should expect to see. If it's exciting, if it's innovative, if it's sparkly, it should be in the aims page. And you want the reviewers thinking about exactly what you are thinking about when you're writing it. So what I mean by that is if you're talking about the welfare state and disability inequities in old age, does everybody think about the welfare state in the same way? You maybe want to make something like that clear in your aims page. So you don't want somebody to be going off on some line of thinking about something and then realizing, and they get in the application, that what they were thinking about isn't what you're actually doing. So it's really like a preview of what's to come. In addition to, this is a great question, in addition to online resources and other factors, how would you advise a first-time R1 participant to approach a successful grant submission in terms of specific time on specific sticking points or things that might set it apart? So that's what these next few slides are about, and I hope my friendly reviewers on the panel will chime in too. So this is my first application tip slide. Look at successful application examples if available. There are a bunch of them online. Read the NOFO carefully. We've already talked about that. Talk with the PO before submission. I'm not a reviewer, but I listen to a lot of reviews, and there are some types of questions or issues that frequently, that come up frequently. So for example, if you're using an instrumental variable identification strategy in your application, reviewers will want to know a lot about that. From application submission to notice of award. Notice of award is when you actually have the funding and you can pop the champagne or a non-alcoholic beverage. It's a minimum of 9 months. So this is not what I would call a speedy process. So there's really sort of like, it's never too early to be thinking about your application. Grantsmanship matters. To be clear and coherent, use visual clues to guide the reviewer through your application. As I said, so people will do things like, if something's really important, they may bold it, or they may underline it, or they may say, they'll structure the application according to the review criteria, so that when the reviewer is filling out the significance section in their score sheet, they can go right to this part of your application that says significance and find what's significant. It's important to be honest about the weaknesses of your work, because every work has some weaknesses. Acknowledging these shows your sophistication and gives you an opportunity to propose strategies to address them. The reviewers will always find something. So be honest about what you can and can't do. Again, every project has its limitations and its strength, and it's about, fairly characterizing those. Secondary data analyses are funded, including for R01s. R01s, however, have a higher standard typically in review in terms of expectations of preliminary data, but you should always provide it if you had it. What does preliminary data mean? It could be things, and Katrina, do you want to take that?
Oh, well, no, I was going to go back to more of your find examples online comment, so you can finish up your thought here and then I'll come back.
So preliminary data can be all kinds of things. It can be papers that you've published on this topic using this data set. Ideally, if you have collaborators, showing that you've collaborated with them before. That's the kind of thing you might show in your research strategy, but also in your biosketch. It can be power analyses. If you have power, if you should be showing power analysis, like if you're doing quantitative work, basically you should be showing power analyses in your application, because one of the things, the sort of big questions reviewers are being asked is like, is this important work that should be done scientifically? And is this application using the right methods, measures, techniques, etc.? You want to give the reviewers all the information that they need to know that you're going to be successful. And I can't tell you how many times there's a question about, this project is so neat, but I don't know if they're going to have the statistical power to do this interaction that they propose. Katrina, what were you going to add?
Oh, so one thing I just wanted to note, in case people also are thinking about this, is that, a lot of times on the NIH website, there are examples of, successful proposals, but they tend to be bench science proposals, less so like pop science, population science type proposals. So one thing just to consider, what I did like with my KO2, because there were really not that many funded, and so it's not a very common activity code, then I ended up going through the NIH reporter, looking at which ones were funded recently and which one was more social sciencey. And then I reached out to that person and asked them if they'd be willing to share their successful KO2 with me. And I assured them my topic was not on their topic. You know, you do the things that you do so that the person doesn't think you're going to try and like replicate what they're doing. But thankfully, like one of them actually did say yes and shared that mechanism or their proposal with me. So I just think like there are ways, even if you maybe don't have examples, to go out and find some that are more fitting for the kind of work that we do in BSSR or in population studies. So I just wanted to say that.
We do have a question here. For the first year of the grant, after the notice of award, typically the 12-month period has been truncated to 9 months. Excuse me. How should researchers deal with this?
That's a great point, and that's true. Often the first year may be shorter than 12 calendar months. In program, we understand that there may be delays in getting projects started. Again, like one of the times to talk with your PO is throughout the grant progress. If there are issues that are coming up, we'd like to hear about them so that we can help troubleshoot on them. But I would say, like, unfortunately, that is an experience that's common just in terms of the constraints of needing to make awards in the fiscal year and when people will propose start dates. I think this is my last, even more application tips. I already said to provide power analyses if applicable. Don't neglect your conceptual model. This seems kind of boilerplate, but it's true. You always want to write the most rigorous, innovative, and high impact application that you can. The reviewers are typically reacting to the science that you're proposing. We'd love it if they thought, like, I'm excited about this because, you know, this is one of NIA's strategic directions, but really, like, they are reacting to the science. If you say someone outside of your institution is going to do something, get a letter of support. Again, you want to give the reviewer every piece of evidence you can that you're likely to be successful. Some general guiding questions for your application. Is this on an important scientific question? That's a significance. And then are you using the data methods measures that will yield a rigorous answer to this question? So thinking about the approach. Somebody asked a question. I know we're running out of time, but this is so fun to be here. What are the expected funding lines for the next few years? What are the pros and cons of applying for an R21 versus an R01 if you're an early career researcher, hasn't won a big grant before? So the first question is, our funding lines are set every year based on appropriations from Congress. So those are year to year. Specific funding lines depend on which NOFO you applied to, where it was reviewed, and the activity code. And RFAs are paid by a set-aside fund. So in that case, it's not based on a score. It's based on sort of the rank order of applications, the scientific merit, and balancing programmatic priorities. So here I just threw up, I should have noted this, and I share the slides, I will. These are our funding lines for fiscal year 2024. I think these will probably be end of year. And to get at this second question, you can see if you look across the, maybe I can get that little laser pointer. Can you see that? Okay. So you see here we have a general pay line that's non-AD science and an AD pay line. You can see here that the pay lines are slightly different for general versus AD, as well as depending on the size of the application. Larger applications have lower funding lines than less expensive applications. AD applications typically have slightly better funding lines than non-AD applications. One of the things to keep in mind as a junior investigator is we have something called ESI status, new investigator status. This only applies to R01s. So this actually may be something you think about in terms of whether you're, man, I can't turn this whether you're thinking about an R01 or an R21. So if you've never had an R01 before, you can see here, the funding line is 19th percentile. If you've had an R01, like Pam and Katrina, the pay line for a non-AD R01 is the 16th percentile. So there's an advantage for those who've never had an R01. If you're never had an R01 and you also are early stage, meaning within 10 years, the percentile pay line is even better at the Center for Scientific Review. So 25th percentile versus 16th percentile. This is only the case of R01s though. ESI status is only a thing for R01s. So that may be something to keep in mind. As I said before, there's sort of different pay lines based on where something is reviewed. So NIA reviewed research applications, these are based on an overall impact score, whereas our CSR, Center for Scientific Reviewed applications, are based on percentiles, which you can think of as sort of a Z-score for those standing study sections. Okay, I know we're almost out of time. Folks wanted to know, how do I know what's coming down the pike? Our National Advisory Council on Aging, which will actually meet on Wednesday and Thursday of this week. One of the things that they do is approve concepts that may be developed into RFAs or other types of NOFOs. You can go to our website to see what these are. These are usually posted within a few days. And this is sort of crystal ball of, if we had one, sort of what might be an RFA or another NOFO from NIA moving forward. Just a couple of selective active NOFOs I want to mention. One is a NOCI, so again, special interest. We're interested in this topic, looking at US health in international perspective, so using things like the HRS family of study, as well as domestic data sets to look at the comparative standing of the United States relative to other countries, as well as reasons why there might be differences in standing. And also an RFA that my colleague Frank Bandiera is leading. It's a collaborative network on structural racism measurement and modeling. Again, so when you get around the bend, like, you see RFA, you think there's going to be set aside funds for this, as well as responsiveness and special review criteria. So unfortunately, this one is coming up pretty close. It's probably pretty hard for anyone to act on it at this point. But again, all this information is available through our newsletter as well as through the NIH guide. I also just wanted to put a plug in for diversity and reentry supplements. So for folks who are from certain underrepresented groups, this is basically a supplement onto an existing NIH grant. We could do a whole hour on diversity and reentry supplements, but I want to make sure folks are aware. Every summer we have a program called Butler-Williams Scholars, which is named after the first two directors of NIA. This is really kind of like a boot camp for applying to NIA. It's really kind of a cool thing. I actually did it myself about a decade ago. You meet with NIA grantees and leadership, you do a mock review. Here are some interesting topics, really cool. And then just a couple of resources to stay in the know, the guide, the NIA blog. And I think that that's what I have, and I have a minute.
Thank you so much, Amelia. I think we might have, do I have one more? Oh no, it looked like there was maybe another question there. That was fantastic. I just want to let folks, oh, there's a quick question here. Can you apply for a diversity supplement if you've been on a T32 and an F31?
I don't know the answer to that question. Email that's NIA training will know. I apologize.
Okay, so email, one thing I can say for sure about Amelia is that she responds to her email. So please do contact her. If she says contact you, or if she says contact her, she means it. So contact her directly if you have like other, with something like this or another question. And she'll be able to either forward you on to the right person or engage with you directly one way or the other. Just to be clear, we are posting the webinar on our website. And I think we can also post the slides, right, Amelia? Because the slides had a lot of links in them.
Yes, I'll
Um,
share them in just a few minutes.
Okay, great. So we will be able to post both the actual slides, which had some links in them, as well as the overall webinar that will be on our website. So on behalf of Katrina, myself, and Jennifer for her helpful and important organizing, we thank you so much for attending today. And please be in touch. Thank so much.
Thanks. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.